In the quiet of the night, Jordan was drifting off to sleep when the fierce growl of his dog tore through the silence as it stared at the backyard fence. Alarmed, he quickly got up and peered into the darkness. Two strange men were climbing over the fence, holding dangerous tools. They were clearly thieves. But what they didn't realize was that what awaited them wasn't money. It was a fierce and terrifying bear. As the intruders cautiously climbed over the fence, Jordan heard the familiar sound of the mother bear. Her presence here was no accident. She had been a regular here since a week ago. That day, Jordan had noticed a strange sound early in the morning. Looking out the window, in the middle of his yard, was a large black bear, its fur glistening in the soft morning light. It was surrounded by two clumsy and playful cubs, their small muzzles pressed to the ground as they explored. But it wasn't their presence that froze Jordan in place. It was the bear's eyes. It looked straight at him through the glass, its gaze unwavering, its awareness almost human. It wasn't fear or ferocity, but something much deeper, something Jordan couldn't name. For a moment, his mind spun, grasping for answers. The bear looked familiar, stirring a memory that had long since been buried. Jordan's breath caught as the realization washed over him. Could it really be her? He was suddenly transported back 3 winters ago. The woods had been blanketed in snow, silent except for the crunch of his boots and Kira's steady breathing. Jordan had been walking to clear his mind, drowning in the weight of a recent loss that left him hollow. Kira, his loyal golden retriever, had barked sharply, pulling him from his thoughts. At first, Jordan had brushed it off as the dog's usual curiosity. Then he'd seen her. The bear had been lying in the snow, her massive body barely rising and falling with shallow breaths. Frost clung to her fur, and her eyes, half-lidded, were dull with exhaustion. She was on the brink. Jordan had stood frozen, every instinct screaming at him to turn and leave, but something kept him rooted. She wasn't just a bear, she was a creature fighting for her life against a relentless winter. Jordan had made his choice in that moment. He rushed Kira home, threw together supplies, fish from the freezer, apples from the pantry, and hay from an old bale he kept in the shed, and returned to the woods. He'd approached cautiously, speaking softly, laying the food and hay at a distance. The bear had barely moved at first, her energy too spent. But as the smell of food reached her, she lifted her head and began to eat, slow and deliberate. Over the days that followed, Jordan built a makeshift shelter from branches and tarps, checking on her daily. He kept his distance, but he could see her grow stronger with each visit. And then, one morning, she was gone, leaving only a circle of flattened hay and paw prints disappearing into the trees. Now standing at the window, Jordan's heart pounded as he looked at the bear and her cubs. He whispered to himself, "Lala." That's what he had called her in his mind during those cold winter weeks. Could it really be her? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Lala seemed calm, her gaze steady and almost familiar. The cubs bumbled about, sniffing at tufts of grass, unaware of the weight of the moment. Jordan knew enough about wildlife to understand the risks. Mother bears were fiercely protective, and any wrong move could provoke an attack. But still, he felt no urge to retreat. There was a connection here, fragile yet unshakable, that he couldn't ignore. Taking a deep breath, Jordan moved to the front door. He opened it slowly, careful not to startle her. Lala's ears twitched at the sound, but she didn't move. The cubs paused their play, watching him with wide, curious eyes. Jordan crouched low, keeping his posture unthreatening. "Hey, girl," he said softly, his voice steady but low. "You remember me, don't you?" Lala tilted her head slightly, her eyes never leaving his. Jordan reached into his pocket and pulled out an apple. Holding it out for a moment, he then gently rolled it across the porch toward her. She sniffed the air, took a few slow steps forward, and carefully picked it up in her jaws. She chewed methodically, her eyes locked on him the whole time. The cubs, emboldened by their mother's calm demeanor, scurried closer, their tiny paws patting the edge of the porch. Jordan felt a pang of awe as he watched them, their innocence a stark contrast to the quiet power of their mother. For a long moment, the cubs edged closer, their tiny paws tapping lightly on the porch steps. Jordan felt a swell of something he couldn't quite name, a mixture of awe, gratitude, and something deeper, a sense of being part of something bigger than himself. Jordan stayed perfectly still, his heart pounding as the cub ventured closer. The small bear sniffed at the edge of the porch before scurrying back to Lala. It was a tentative moment, fragile and fleeting, yet it spoke volumes. Jordan knew then that Lala didn't see him as a threat. There was something else, a cautious understanding that felt almost like recognition. Over the next few days, the visits became a pattern. Every morning, Jordan would wake to find Lala and her cubs near the edge of his yard. He began leaving small piles of fruit and nuts at a distance, always careful to retreat before they approached. Lala grew bolder, stepping further into the yard, while her cubs became adventurous, climbing over rocks and playfully chasing each other. The sight brought a smile to Jordan's face. It had been years since he'd felt this kind of joy, a simple, unfiltered connection to the world outside his door. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Jordan watched from his kitchen window as the cubs tumbled across the grass. Their clumsy antics drew soft chuckles from him, their innocent playfulness reminding him of the carefree days of his youth. Lala, meanwhile, lay a short distance away, her body stretched out in the shade of an old oak tree. She appeared relaxed, almost at peace, as if she knew this place was safe. Jordan decided it was time to take a step closer. Grabbing a basket of apples and pears, he walked out onto the porch, his movements slow and deliberate. Lala lifted her head, her dark eyes tracking his every move, but she didn't rise. He placed the basket near the edge of the porch, then stepped back, sitting on the steps to watch. The cubs were the first to investigate, their noses twitching as they sniffed at the fruit. They pawed at the basket, tipping it over and sending apples rolling in all directions. Lala remained still, her calm demeanor assuring Jordan that she was comfortable with his presence. As days turned into weeks, the bond between Jordan and the bears deepened. The cubs began treating the yard as their playground, climbing trees, rolling in the grass, and even nudging each other with playful growls. Lala, ever watchful, allowed these moments to unfold with a quiet confidence that Jordan couldn't help but admire. He started documenting the bears' visits, capturing their antics on an old camera he hadn't used in years. Each video felt like a small treasure, a testament to the unlikely friendship that was blossoming between him and this wild family. It wasn't just the bears that changed. Jordan found himself transformed as well. The once solitary man, who had spent years shutting out the world, now felt a renewed sense of purpose. Watching Lala and her cubs brought him a profound sense of peace, a reminder of the beauty in nature's simplicity. Every interaction, no matter how small, reinforced the trust they were building. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Jordan sat on his porch, a mug of coffee in hand. The cubs played nearby, their tiny roars echoing across the yard, while Lala watched from her usual spot beneath the oak tree. Jordan couldn't help but marvel at the unlikely connection that had formed. He didn't need to say a word. The quiet companionship spoke louder than anything he could express. Each day was a step forward, a dance of trust between man and bear. Jordan knew the road ahead would require patience and care, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready. Ready to embrace the unknown, and ready to see where this extraordinary bond would lead. The sun was setting over the dense forest that bordered Jordan's backyard, casting long shadows that danced on the wooden fence. From the kitchen window, Kira, his loyal Labrador, had her nose pressed against the glass. Her tail wagged furiously, the sound of it thumping against the wall, a familiar rhythm Jordan had grown used to over the past week. She was watching the giddy antics of Lala's cubs as they rolled and tumbled in the tall grass near the tree line. Jordan paused at the sink, drying his hands on a dish towel as he studied the scene. For days now, Kira had been transfixed by the sight of the bear cubs. It was as if she recognized their playful energy, their innocent curiosity. At first, Jordan had been uneasy about the whole situation. Wild animals, especially bears, weren't exactly ideal backyard companions. But Lala, the mother bear, had been calm and composed during her visits, her gaze often landing on Jordan with what he could only describe as an understanding. Still, he wasn't sure if allowing Kira to get close to the cubs was a good idea. But tonight felt different. The air carried a sense of peace, and Jordan found himself opening the back door before he could second-guess the decision. Kira perked up immediately, turning her head toward him, her brown eyes wide with excitement. "All right, girl," Jordan said softly, kneeling to attach her leash. "Let's take this slow, okay? No sudden moves." The crunch of Jordan's boots on the gravel path drew the attention of Lala, who stood a few yards away. She didn't move closer, but her posture stiffened slightly. Her dark eyes followed every step as Jordan guided Kira into the yard. The cubs, noticing the commotion, paused mid-play and sat upright, their heads tilting in unison. Kira hesitated at first, her paws barely touching the grass as her tail wagged in tentative excitement. Jordan knelt beside her, his hand resting gently on her collar. "Easy, girl," he whispered. One of the cubs, bolder than the others, broke the stillness. It waddled forward, sniffing the air as it closed the gap between them. Kira lowered her head, her body language soft and submissive. The cub stopped a foot away, its nose twitching as it inspected the strange creature before it. Jordan held his breath as the cub leaned closer, giving Kira's fur a tentative sniff. Then, with a sudden burst of courage, Kira's tail wagged enthusiastically, and she let out a low, friendly bark. The cub startled briefly, hopping back a step, but then seemed to reconsider. It let out a soft grunt, a sound Jordan could only interpret as curiosity, and approached again. Within minutes, the ice was broken. The cubs began to encircle Kira, their small bodies bumping into her as they nudged her playfully. Kira responded with glee, rolling onto her back and pawing at the air. One cub took this as an invitation to climb onto her belly, its tiny claws gripping her fur as it balanced precariously. From a distance, Lala watched without interference. Her massive form remained still, but her eyes darted between her cubs and Jordan. He could sense her vigilance, the unspoken agreement between them. As long as everything remained peaceful, she wouldn't intervene. Jordan found himself smiling, unable to look away from the surreal scene unfolding in his yard. His dog, his sweet, goofy Kira, was playing with wild bear cubs as if they were old friends. The harmony of it all was disarming. He hadn't planned for this, hadn't expected such a natural connection to emerge between his world and Lala's. "Guess you've got away with animals, huh, girl?" Jordan murmured to Kira, though his words felt more like an acknowledgement of something bigger. As the evening deepened, Jordan retrieved his camera from the porch. He knew he couldn't let this moment pass without documenting it. Through the lens, he captured the cubs chasing Kira in circles, their playful growls mingling with her excited barks. Lala remained in the frame, a steady presence in the background, her calm demeanor radiating trust. Later, as the cubs began to tire and Kira flopped onto the grass, panting contentedly, Jordan lowered the camera and sat on the porch steps. He couldn't shake the feeling that what he was witnessing was more than just a rare encounter. It was a reminder of the possibilities that existed when barriers were softened, when trust replaced fear. It was a quiet night, the kind where the darkness seems to wrap around everything, muting the world. The lights in Jordan's home were off, save for the faint glow of the moon spilling through the bedroom curtains. Kira, his ever-loyal dog, lay curled up at the foot of the bed, her breathing steady and calm. Jordan had just begun to drift off when Kira's low growl sliced through the silence. The growl turned into a sharp bark, and then another, more urgent. Kira was on her feet, her ears pinned back, and her gaze fixed toward the backyard. Jordan sat up, heart pounding. "What is it, girl?" he whispered, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. He moved to the window, parting the curtain just enough to see outside. His heart sank. 2 men were by the back fence, their figures barely visible in the moonlight. One was already over the fence, crouching near the shed, while the other was climbing over, a bag slung over his shoulder. Jordan's first instinct was to grab his old baseball bat from the closet. He moved quickly but quietly, his mind racing. These men weren't just passing through, they were here with a purpose. As he reached for the bat, Kira growled again, louder this time, her focus unwavering on the intruders. Before Jordan could move toward the door, a deep, guttural roar shattered the stillness of the night. It wasn't Kira, it was deeper, more primal. It came from the edge of the woods that bordered the backyard. Jordan froze, his hand tightening on the bat. The roar came again, and this time it was followed by movement. From the shadows of the trees emerged Lala, her massive frame illuminated by the moonlight. The sight was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Lala stood tall, her thick fur rippling as she moved toward the intruders with deliberate, measured steps. Behind her, 2 smaller figures appeared, her cubs sticking close to their mother but staying just out of sight. The first man froze, his head snapping toward the sound. "What the hell?" he muttered, his voice shaking. Lala's eyes locked onto the men, her gaze cold and unyielding. Her lips curled back just enough to show her teeth, and the low growl rumbling from her chest seemed to vibrate the very air. She took another step forward, and the first man stumbled back, nearly losing his footing. Guy Bear!" The second man stammered, his voice cracking. "Run, man! It's a bear!" the first one yelled, dropping the bag and scrambling to climb back over the fence. But it wasn't that simple. Kira, emboldened by Lala's presence, began barking furiously and rushed toward the fence, her barks sharp and relentless. The combined threat of Lala and Kira was too much for the intruders. The second man tripped over the discarded bag, landing hard on his side before clawing his way up and over the fence. Lala stopped at the edge of the yard, watching them with unblinking intensity until they disappeared into the darkness. Only then did her growl fade, replaced by a calm silence. The cubs ventured closer, one of them letting out a small, curious huff as it sniffed the air. Jordan stepped out onto the porch, his bat still in hand, though he no longer needed it. He looked at Lala, who turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting his. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Jordan smiled faintly, his shoulders relaxing. "Thanks, Lala," he said, quietly, setting the bat aside. He walked down the steps, stopping a respectful distance from the bear. From his pocket, he pulled out an apple, holding it up briefly, before placing it on the ground. Lala approached slowly, her steps deliberate, but not threatening. She sniffed the apple, her ears flicking forward, and then she picked it up gently with her teeth. She didn't linger. With a soft grunt, she turned back toward the woods, her cubs following close behind. The next morning, Jordan called the police to report the break-in. The officers arrived, taking note of the bag and the footprints left in the soft soil near the fence. "They'll be easy to find," one officer assured him. "These guys aren't exactly careful." As the officers drove away, Jordan sat on the porch with Kira at his feet. His gaze drifted to the edge of the woods, where Lala and her cubs had disappeared. It wasn't the first time Lala had come to his aid. but tonight felt different. It was as though she understood the danger, as though she'd chosen to protect the place she too saw as safe. Jordan reached down to scratch behind Kira's ears, the tension from the night finally easing. "She's something else, isn't she?" he murmured, more to himself than to Kira. The woods were quiet again, the morning sun starting to filter through the trees. For Jordan, the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the presence of Lala, the bond they shared, and the unspoken promise that no matter how wild the world became, they'd always watch out for each other. Jordan had always been a private man, but something about his connection with Lala and her cubs felt too extraordinary to keep to himself. After much thought, he decided to document their daily interactions. Armed with nothing more than his phone and a tripod, he began recording short clips of the bears visiting his yard, Kira the dog playing cautiously but enthusiastically with the cubs, and even the quieter moments when Lala would rest under the old oak tree, watching over her playful little ones. A week later, Jordan uploaded his first video. He titled it simply, "A Family of Bears in My Backyard." Within hours, the video had dozens of views. By the next morning, it had reached thousands. Comments flooded in, ranging from admiration for the bear's beauty to questions about how Jordan had gained their trust. "Wow, this is incredible," one viewer wrote. "I didn't think bears could be so calm around people." Another added, "This man and his dog are living a fairy tale. More videos, please." Encouraged by the response, Jordan continued to post new clips. Each video told a different part of the story. Lala leading her cubs through the yard, Kira cautiously wagging her tail as the cubs tumbled over each other, and the cubs climbing low branches as Lala kept a watchful eye. The authenticity of the moments resonated with people. There were no tricks, no overly dramatic edits, just a man, his dog, and a family of bears learning to coexist. The video that gained the most traction, however, was the one Jordan hesitated to share. It was footage from the night the two thieves had tried to break into his home. The camera had caught everything: the muffled voices of the intruders, the sudden roar of Lala appearing from the shadows, and their panicked scramble to escape. The clip ended with Kira barking triumphantly and Jordan stepping into the frame, visibly relieved. Jordan uploaded the video with the title, "A Bear Saves Me from Two Thieves." Within hours, it went viral. The views climbed into the millions. News outlets picked up the story, dubbing Lala the Guardian Bear. People were fascinated not just by her protective instincts, but by the bond she seemed to share with Jordan and Kira. "Is this real?" someone commented. "This bear is a better watchdog than most dogs." Another wrote, "Nature is amazing. This man must have done something extraordinary for the bear to trust him like this." The attention wasn't all positive. Some people expressed concern about the safety of such close interactions with wild animals. Others accused Jordan of irresponsibility, claiming he was putting himself, the bears, and his neighbors in danger. Jordan read every comment carefully, considering their perspectives, but he knew he wasn't reckless. He had spent years learning how to respect and coexist with wildlife. As Lala and her cubs became local celebrities, something remarkable began to happen. People in Jordan's small community started to see wildlife differently. Neighbors who once viewed bears as dangerous pests now admired them. Children in the area drew pictures of Lala and her cubs, proudly showing them to Jordan whenever they saw him in town. One afternoon, as Jordan refilled the bird feeder in his yard, a man named Sam approached him. Sam was known for his disdain toward animals, often complaining about deer eating his garden or raccoons tipping over his trash cans. But today, he wore a curious smile. "I watched your videos, Jordan," Sam said, shifting awkwardly. "That bear of yours, she's something special. Made me think maybe these animals aren't just trouble after all." Jordan nodded, hiding his surprise. "They're not ours to control," he said simply. "But we can learn to share space with them. It's better for everyone that way. Sam scratched his head. Maybe you're right. I've been leaving scraps out for the birds lately. Feels good seeing them come around. Moments like these made Jordan realize the true impact of his story. It wasn't just about sharing extraordinary footage or gaining online fame. It was about changing perceptions, helping people see that nature wasn't something to fear, but something to cherish and protect. But Jordan also felt a new weight on his shoulders. Lala and her cubs had grown comfortable around his property, but he knew not everyone in the world would treat them kindly. He began setting stricter boundaries, ensuring the bears stayed at a safe distance and had minimal contact with strangers. He also reached out to local wildlife experts, asking how he could better protect Lala and her family while maintaining their natural instincts. The early morning sun peeked through the pines, casting long golden shadows across Jordan's backyard. A familiar rustle in the underbrush made him glance up from the porch steps where he was sipping his coffee. Sure enough, there she was, Lala, the sleek black bear, ambling into the clearing with her 2 cubs in tow. But today, something was different. Instead of her usual cautious approach, Lala stopped short at the edge of the clearing. She looked at Jordan, then at the cubs, and back again. It was a deliberate pause, as if she were weighing something in her mind. Jordan held his breath, unsure of what she intended. Finally, with a soft huff, Lala nudged her cubs forward and retreated back into the trees. Jordan blinked, unsure of what he had just witnessed. The cubs, oblivious to the significance of their mother's actions, tumbled onto the grass and began to wrestle playfully. Lala's massive frame was barely visible now, just a shadow weaving through the trees. "Guess it's official," Jordan muttered, setting his coffee down. "She trusts me." That realization hit him harder than he expected. For a wild animal, especially a bear, to leave her young in his care was no small gesture. It was a silent, primal declaration of trust, and with it came an immense responsibility. Jordan spent the next few days making adjustments. He set up a small area near the edge of his yard with natural barriers made of fallen logs and large rocks. It wasn't much, but it offered some protection from wandering predators while blending seamlessly with the surrounding forest. He laid down soft hay and even placed an old water trough he'd cleaned out and filled. It became a safe haven where the cubs could rest while their mother was away. As the cubs grew more comfortable, Jordan noticed their personalities shining through. The larger one was adventurous, often trying to climb the low branches of the trees or swatting curiously at butterflies. The smaller one, shy but clever, preferred to sit back and watch before joining in the fun. Jordan couldn't help but smile as he watched them dart through the grass, chasing each other with the unbridled energy of youth. Lala continued her visits, but now she rarely lingered. Her pattern was clear. She'd arrive early in the morning, ensure the cubs were settled, then disappear into the forest for hours. Jordan suspected she was foraging further away, knowing her young were safe in the space he had created. To better understand his unusual house guests, Jordan dove into research. He spent evenings poring over books and online resources about black bears. He learned about their diet, behavior, and social structures, noting small details that helped him interact with the cubs without disturbing their natural instincts. He began to recognize their subtle signals, like the way they flattened their ears when startled or chirped softly to communicate with each other. One afternoon, Jordan was stacking firewood near the edge of the clearing when he heard the unmistakable sound of paws scampering through the grass. He turned to see the cubs racing toward him, their playful growls breaking the silence. They stopped short a few feet away, eyeing him with curiosity. Slowly, Jordan crouched down, careful not to make any sudden movements. "Hey there, little ones," he said, his voice low and steady. The larger cub sniffed the air, inching closer, while the smaller one hung back, watching intently. Jordan chuckled softly, marveling at how natural this felt. In those moments, surrounded by the quiet hum of nature and the playful energy of the cubs, Jordan realized something profound. He was no longer just an observer of the wild. He had become part of it, woven into the rhythm of their lives in a way that felt both humbling and extraordinary. The cubs eventually tired themselves out, collapsing onto the hay pile Jordan had set up. He watched them doze off, their tiny bodies rising and falling with each breath. The sight filled him with a quiet sense of joy and purpose. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the yard in shades of amber and gold, Jordan sat on the porch steps, a deep sense of connection settling over him. This wasn't just a relationship born of chance, it was a testament to trust, built one small gesture at a time. And as Lala returned to gather her cubs, her calm gaze met his, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Jordan nodded slightly. "You're welcome," he whispered. It started as a modest effort. Jordan, with his deep love for the woods and its creatures, never imagined he'd find himself speaking in front of dozens of eager faces at the town hall. But there he was, standing on a creaky wooden stage, holding a microphone, while a projector flickered images of Lala, the majestic bear who had become a part of his life story. Jordan adjusted the microphone and began. "It was never about being a hero," he said, his voice steady but warm. "It was about recognizing that sometimes nature calls out for help, and it's up to us to answer." Behind him, a picture of Lala and her cubs flashed on the screen, drawing murmurs from the audience. He described the first time he'd encountered Lala, a malnourished bear on the brink of collapse. The room fell silent as Jordan recounted the risks he took and the small, deliberate steps that led to Lala trusting him. "She didn't need saving. She needed a chance, just like any of us would," he said, pausing to let the words sink in. Over time, Jordan became a regular at local events, invited to speak about his connection with Lala and the importance of respecting wildlife. His talks weren't flashy, but they were honest. He focused on the small actions, leaving out food during harsh winters, giving animals space, and seeing them as neighbors rather than intruders. "People always ask me," Jordan said one evening at a community center, "how can we live alongside creatures as big as bears?" My answer's simple: we share the same home. The moment we stop thinking of the woods as ours alone, we find balance. Lala's story became more than a tale of survival. It became a symbol for the town, a reminder of what was possible when people chose compassion over fear. Children started drawing pictures of Lala for school projects. Adults whispered her name during hikes, hoping to catch a glimpse of her lumbering through the woods. One summer, Jordan was asked to present at a larger regional event, an environmental festival in a nearby city. As he drove through winding mountain roads, a sense of pride mingled with his usual modesty. He knew the story wasn't just his anymore, it belonged to everyone who'd been touched by it. Standing on a larger stage now, Jordan shared new updates about Lala and her cubs, who had grown into strong, independent bears. "She still visits," he told the crowd with a smile, "though not as often. She's got her own life to live after all." The crowd laughed softly, but the point wasn't lost on them. Jordan spoke about coexisting with wildlife, emphasizing that it wasn't about taming nature, but allowing it to thrive. "Lala doesn't need me to survive anymore," he said, "but I need her to remind me of what it means to live in harmony." Word of his talks began to spread, and soon local newspapers and online blogs picked up his story. Jordan found himself answering emails from strangers, thanking him for inspiring them to reconsider their relationship with the natural world. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the quiet countryside, bathing Jordan's modest porch in warm light. He leaned back in his creaky wooden chair, the familiar rhythm of its groans soothing as he watched the scene unfold in his yard. Lala, The black bear he had once saved ambled slowly across the grass, her now grown cubs tumbling over one another in playful chaos. The air felt still, yet alive, humming with a quiet magic that had come to define Jordan's life since that fateful winter years ago. The cubs, nearly indistinguishable from their mother in size, chased one another around the sturdy oak tree in the middle of the yard. Every now and then, they'd pause to glance at Jordan, curiosity flickering in their dark eyes before they returned to their games. Lala remained close, her massive form both a watchful presence and a calming anchor. She looked at him now, her gaze steady and soft, as if she understood the depth of his thoughts. Jordan's mind wandered back to the beginning. He could still see the thin layer of frost clinging to Lala's fur as she lay helpless in the snow, her breaths shallow and labored. Back then, he hadn't hesitated to help, even though common sense might have warned him otherwise. A small thing, he muttered to himself now, shaking his head with a faint smile. But that small thing had sparked a chain of moments that had led to this, a quiet connection, both fragile and unbreakable. It felt like yesterday he was hauling hay and fruit through knee-deep snow to keep Lala alive. And now, here she was, her family thriving. Her presence, a constant reminder of how much things had changed. Jordan let his eyes drift across the yard to the small patch of wildflowers blooming near the edge of the fence, a gentle testament to the life he'd nurtured here. It wasn't just Lala's family that had grown stronger. He had too.